Welcome to the Fine Print, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Caleb Teskey, and I'm joined today by Amelia Machia. Is that what we're going with?
So I usually go by Amelia Grace, simply because my last name is really hard to say. My last name is Maishi, but it's spelled like Machia.
Okay, sorry. All right, and she is Director of Communications for Green Mountain Patients Alliance. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Yeah.
Now, would you hit us? Have you watched any of my other interviews?
I have. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So will you hit us with a 5-minute life story?
Yeah, totally. So so currently the jargon changes constantly as my mood changes, but right now I call myself a chronic illness collector. When I was like 4 or 5, I got diagnosed with something called Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. And what that means is it's a connective tissue disorder where I have like faulty collagen. So collagen's what holds together like everything, like your ligaments, your tendons, your skin, your joints, like all of that. So mine is just like defective. So like I always think of, there's that episode of SpongeBob where like the episode where they're walking around selling chocolate bars or whatever. And there's the dude that's like, I have glass joints and paper skin. And like when I was growing up, everybody was like, that's Amelia. So I've dealt with that my whole life. And then when I turned like 16 or 17, I started getting symptoms of what I now know as Crohn's disease. So after dealing with like that whole lifetime of chronic pain, I went to my geneticist and I was like, just so you know, I was like 19 at the time. I was like, I smoke pot and that's how I deal with this. And she was awesome. And she was like, all right, let's just make it legal. And she wrote me out my paperwork for my card. And back then, so this was 14, I think, 14, 15.
So that was right at the beginning of the medical market in Vermont, wasn't it?
Kind of, yeah. It was early on. So back then you had to choose between growing or going to a dispensary, and you had to designate a single dispensary that you were going to go to. Right. So not knowing any better, I was like, well, the one in Burlington's probably the best one because it's probably got like the most resources.
Sure.
So I used to go to CVD back when it was called CVD. And after, I think, 1.5 years, 2 years, and like easily 10 to 12 grand later, I just like couldn't do it anymore. I could not afford like going to the dispensaries. The quality had been going down the whole time I was going there. And I was noticing that it took me a lot more bud to feel an effect that I wanted to feel, or I was like blowing through oil or blowing through tincture. Like stuff just wasn't working as good as it used to. And it was so expensive. Like we're talking like $350, $400 an ounce for certain things. Like it was terrible. I was dropping between like $1,000 and like $1,500 every time I went. And for like a 19-year-old, like that's a lot of money.
Yeah. For anyone, I think that's a decent chunk of change.
Yeah, totally. So went to school at Johnson for 1.5 years during all of this, and then decided I didn't want a liberal arts degree. So I dropped out and went to a trade school for photography in Massachusetts. And while I was down there, I still had my medical card, but like couldn't access anything in Mass, obviously, because they didn't have reciprocity. But while I was down there, I had friends who were like growing their own. And there was also a lot of just like local shit that was like so much better than the dispensaries back home. And so I was like, if people down here, like in Mass, where it's like not, back then it wasn't like known that Mass weed was like good weed, you know? I was like, if it's down here, it's definitely in Vermont. Like it's definitely grown better. Like, you know, we're an agricultural state. So finished out school, spent 5 or 6 months in Brooklyn, interning for a rock and roll photographer named Cheshire, who used to tour with like Led Zeppelin, and she's shot like Ringo Starr and Paul McCartney and fucking Joni Mitchell and all of them.
Cool.
So I spent like 5 months basically organizing her portfolio. And then after I kind of just like had my fill of the city, I came back to Vermont, moved in with my sister, and she's also a patient, and we started growing at a certain point and never looked back. She grew for, I think, the 2.5 years we lived together. And then ever since then, I've only gotten my stuff from local producers.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's a lot of them, and that's like
Yeah.
it'd be weird not to, for me personally. So you were one of the first people I really started talking to about this story. I don't remember how we connected, but you put me in touch with some super helpful folks, which I wanted to thank you for. And yeah, also you've been involved in this so much longer than me. I was kind of hoping that you would take the reins here and just tell us, you know, um, for fear of making an ass of myself. Um, so can you tell it? I want to back up a little bit and talk about your medical conditions, if you wouldn't
Yeah.
mind, and talk about what are some of your symptoms and how does cannabis help you treat those symptoms?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So I guess first I'll talk about the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome because that's kind of like the laundry list of symptoms. So because it's a connective tissue disease, my joints dislocate, um, and my skin is really thin, so it tears and bruises really easily, and it takes a lot longer to heal. My veins are really tiny and they're rolly, so when I go to get IVs, I have to get poked like 7, 8 times usually. Um, so like that all kind of manifests itself in like its own level of chronic pain. My husband stopped by on work.
Hey, buddy.
Love you too. So yeah, so that's got its own like brand of chronic pain. And then on top of that, with the Ehlers-Danlos, you get chronic fatigue. So you're just like exhausted all the time because your muscles are constantly working overtime to keep your joints like in and not dislocating. So yeah, you've got fatigue, you've got body pain. There's a thing with Ehlers-Danlos where it's like if your joints aren't dislocating, they like feel wobbly all the time. So like everything's just working even harder to hold them in place. So that's like the Ehlers-Danlos part of it. And I've had that since I was born. And like I said, I got diagnosed before, but I've had symptoms my whole life. And that comes with its own kind of like degenerativeness of my joints and stuff. So that's like pain that's going to get worse the older I get. So there's that. And then my Crohn's disease is like I have appetite issues. Like I cannot eat unless I consume cannabis first. I've got like obviously like there's pain and stuff that goes on with Crohn's disease, and like you go from like insane constipation to like insane diarrhea, and you just like never think it's gonna stop. So I guess in like most regards, cannabis is like for pain for me. It's like pain, and then I swing widely between like that insane fatigue and like insane insomnia where I don't sleep at all. So I use cannabis for that too. I'm literally a Grey's Anatomy of issues, so this is gonna take a sec.
No, take your time, please.
Yeah, totally. I also was recently diagnosed with ADHD, which like at the age of 26, you look back and you're like, oh my God, yeah, obviously. And so for that, I would say like there are certain strains of cannabis that are useful for that, and there are certain strains that are not.
Which ones?
So I would say like so we obviously know that like there are no true sativas and there are no true indicas anymore. Like everything's a hybrid. So sativa and indica aren't my favorite descriptors for things. But I would say things that feel more sativa dominant are easier for me to be productive on, but they
Really?
don't tend to have the like body effect that
Yeah.
I'm looking for in like everything.
Yeah. Oh
And
no, I'm
then,
sorry. I had a brain fart there. I thought you said indica. No, I don't. Keep going.
Yeah. So I would say like sativa dominant or sativa forward, like that feeling is what I use for more productivity kind of sake. But most of the time, like the stuff I smoke on a daily basis is what people smoke before they go to bed. And that's just kind of my like daily driver.
So you're a heavy hitter.
Totally.
Yeah. And what about the Crohn's disease? My grandfather had Crohn's disease when he died, and he had all kinds of problems with digestion and things of that nature. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, so when I first got diagnosed, I had this like insane pain that had been going on from like the age of like 17 to like 19. And it was just like it would start in my rib cage and it would like move around my back, and it was really sharp and sudden and severe. And when I was in photo school, it was becoming like more and more often. And I went to the hospital like multiple times for it, and they just kept being like, we don't know what's wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. At one point, a doctor tried to tell me that what I was experiencing was inflammation in my lungs from smoking cannabis. And he literally wrote me a prescription for Tylenol. And I was a medical patient at the time. And I was like, dude, that's so ridiculous. So after all of this, during school, I was staying with my cousins one night, and I got hit with like the hardest pain I had felt so far. And he rushed me to the hospital, and I had a gallstone that was like huge. Like it had been there for like all those years. Like this was the source of the pain. So I went into immediate surgery. And when they went to retrieve the gallstone, they found like the massive patches of inflammation that were like all through my digestive tract. And they were like, oh shit, she's got Crohn's disease.
Damn.
So that was like the diagnosis of it. At first I was on these shots called Humira.
Yeah, that's what I take. Yeah.
Yeah, I know you've got arthritis. And I've got like, I have not rheumatoid arthritis. I have a lower level arthritis because of my Ehlers. So it was funny that I was getting medication for like 2 of my illnesses. But the Humira I found for me, and like everybody's different. The longer I did it, the worse it got. The more the shot hurt, the more exhausted I'd get after. Like it was just like a lot. And I think some of it was probably psychosomatic, but like it just wasn't the right method for me. So, hi buddy. My doctor put me on infusions of Remicade instead. And I've been on either Remicade or Inflectra. They're basically the same thing. I've been on that for the last like 2.5 years. And
is that like an intravenous infusion?
Yeah. So I go to UVM every 8 weeks for like an hour or 2 hours, depending on the medication.
Every 2 months, huh?
Yeah.
And you have to drive there and sit in the hospital.
Yeah. I mean, they're really, really nice people. They're really professional. Sure. And it beats like stabbing myself in the leg every 2 weeks.
You don't like that? I actually didn't mind it. I thought I was going to hate it at first. I actually had my girlfriend do the first one because I was afraid of it. And she was laughing. You know, I find it's not that bad. And it actually helped a lot. Although I'm not super thrilled about taking any kind of pharmaceuticals for, you know, various personal reasons.
Yeah. I mean, it's all medicine, you know. I think that it can all be used in a good way or in a bad way. They're just chemicals, and the chemicals are reacting with the chemicals in your brain, and how you decide to proceed with that is between you and your doctor. Yeah,
as it should be.
Yeah.
My doctor wouldn't talk to me about it because they're federally funded, so I couldn't talk about getting a medical card. The regulations in Vermont were very strict right off the bat when they first implemented this program. It was like, you got to have AIDS or cancer or basically be dying.
Yeah.
Which was, you know, I would have loved to have a medical card. Although if I saw some of those prices, I'm not sure I would have taken them up on that.
Well, I don't have a card anymore. So, I mean, I guess that kind of gets into like the advocacy stuff.
Yeah, get in there.
Yeah, but I did not renew my card after 2015. I haven't been a patient since then. I got it in 2014. And I just don't feel right going back into a program that I advocate against, and that I am constantly like telling people like this is so harmful, and the things that we're doing to patients are so harmful. Why would I want to participate in that? Like I'm not going to give the state my money just so that they can continue to like take advantage of vulnerable people.
I also heard that some of the medical dispensaries in Vermont had some quality control issues.
There definitely were some quality control issues. I have never worked in the dispensaries. I have no firsthand account knowledge of any of it. But I will say that it has been reported on in credible news outlets throughout the state that in at least CBD, there was a mold problem at one point in time. Anecdotally, I do know people that have worked in the dispensaries, and they can all attest to mold, mildew. I was just talking to an employee the other day that was saying in 2016 and 2017, he was getting paid less than $15 an hour, and they had mold and mildew on their plants. So
send them to me.
Right? 5 years is not that long ago. And I know that now they're like, well, we have new owners, new management. We just scrapped a bunch of people, everything's going to be different, everything's going to be better because there's more funding and more money. And it's like, dude, like, isn't the damage done? You know, like, haven't we already proven that there's a community that is willing and able to take care of these patients where the dispensaries have failed up until this point? I don't know. I think that the only people that truly benefit from the medical dispensaries is those that have the privilege to access them.
And does money solve a problem? Is
Yeah.
money the solution to every problem? You know, it seems like some people think it is. I personally do not.
I
You
think
know,
it depends on where the money goes,
sure.
you
Who you're
know?
giving it to. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
If you,
totally.
you know, who's your growers? If you're giving money to shitty growers to grow weed, you're gonna get shitty weed.
Yeah.
Cool. So can you talk a little bit? Have you sat through any like testimonies with committees or in
Oh,
Montpelier?
totally, totally. This past legislative session was kind of slow for me actually compared to the year before. This year it was mainly focused on getting, on getting the legal market rolling out, the adult use market, and medical once again got tossed to the side. There was a medical bill in place that Senator Sears brought forward, but it died. Like it was dead in the water weeks ago. um, so not much happened this legislative session in regard to medical. But the year before, when Jesse Lynn and Jeffrey and I all started kind of working together, we did go into House GovOps, and Jesse Lynn and I both testified about S25, which was legislation that was coming up to kind of fix the issues with S54. And so that was where we tried to do things like remove the THC caps. We tried to do things like raise plant counts. We were trying to allow patients to shop tax-free from the adult use places. Like everything we're still kind of talking about at this point. We went in and advocated for it. Now we got some of the things that we wanted. We did not get a lot of them at the time. And still my main concern was what is going to happen to the medical marijuana fund. And at that time, it had over $400,000 sitting in it, unused. And in 2017, the state reappropriated $300,000 from that fund into the general fund to pay for things that had been overlooked in budgeting issues. And the state just like stole $300,000 of non-tax money. Like that was not tax money.
Interesting.
And so my big concern coming into adult use was I do not want to see the medical marijuana fund getting just like absorbed into the cannabis regulation fund and the patients lose out on all of that money that they're the ones who have contributed to. That's $50 cards from every single patient and caregiver and a $25,000 licensing fee from the dispensaries. Like none of that is tax money and it's all meant to help the patients. So I went in there ranting and raving about that because I have a tendency to yell at people. And our big issue there was the CCB was supposed to absorb the medical program like almost instantly. And if they had done that, they would have absorbed the medical cannabis fund along with it. Now, mind you, this was like 2 years ago almost at this point. So I'm like, my timelines are fuzzy, but it was
all right. As long as you're ballpark, I think we could work through it. Yeah.
Ballparking, totally. I've got galaxy brain. So we were trying to get the date that the CCB was going to absorb the medical program pushed forward, which we were successful in doing. But in doing so, like we still don't have a set medical cannabis fund, even as the CCB is like sitting now. And I'm not sure what's going on with it. To be fair, they've had a lot of things to worry about recently.
Sorry.
You know, to be fair.
Yeah, sorry, I had to do it.
Got you. Like the CCB has had a lot on their plates. And the medical program, a lot of what needs to be changed needs to be done legislatively. So there's really not a ton that they can do as far as rulemaking goes, but it's just one of those things. So yeah, we were talking about that in testimony. And Jess was talking also about things like THC caps, mandatory third-party full panel lab testing for everybody, including the medical dispensaries, a standardized education program that every bud tender needs to go through, including the medical dispensaries. Like a lot of what we were trying to do and are still trying to do is just level the playing field in regard to what people's responsibilities are in running these businesses.
Now, can we back it up? Can we Tarantino this? Because I assume you've probably sat in on some other legislative sessions leading up to this in the
Oh,
last couple of years or so. I'd like to hear about some of the things that went on in those sessions.
yeah, totally. So there was it's been rebranded since, and I can't remember what the new name is because I don't think they've even appointed the members yet. But back in the day, there was something called the the Symptom Relief Oversight Committee,
Yeah,
which was made up of one patient from each of the dispensaries, as well as a doctor, somebody in law enforcement, and I think somebody from zoning, and a nurse that like never showed up to meetings. um, and Jessie Lynn was basically the only person from like the community who wasn't on that panel attending these meetings because they weren't like advertising them for years. Like she had been attending them for 2 or 3 years before, 2020, 2021 happened. And so when all of this legislation started coming in, like S54, S25, mainly S25, myself, Jessie Lynn, Tito, Fran. I'm not sure if you know Fran Janik, but
no,
he's an OG. He's a legend,
cool,
medical cannabis advocate in the state. He's done a ton.
cool.
So we all started sitting in on these symptom relief oversight committee meetings, only to find a few meetings in they weren't being recorded. And
Is
there
this a
was,
state? Is this a state agency?
yes.
So
Well,
all that shit's supposed to be recorded, right? And
yes.
they put it on a YouTube channel. Okay.
Yes, so they were supposed to be recording all of their meetings,
Huh.
and they weren't. There was no proof or record of what was being said in any of them. And when I finally brought this
Wow.
up, it was basically like, we lack the infrastructure to do that. They were on Microsoft Teams. They were on the same thing that the CCB like was meeting on remotely.
Lacking infrastructure. They have the biggest. They have the biggest budget in the state. They're like the largest employer in the state. They can't get a camera and a.
Well, they can't hit record like we're
Yeah.
doing right now.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I did this for free on my girlfriend's laptop. I think we could figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. So we would go in there, and the big thing there was we were advocating for change, and they weren't responsible for advocacy. Like they were basically like, we are not advocates here. We are not like advocating for legislative change based on our own agendas. I hate when that word gets thrown around. And a lot of what we were asking for was like, hey, like, can you support us in saying that doctors should have the ability to prescribe cannabis for any condition, based on their own opinion of the patient, rather than having this arbitrary list of conditions that a doctor has to pick from if they're and by the way, doctors don't actually prescribe cannabis in this state. They just verify whether or not you have a condition that qualifies for cannabis.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was like one of the major changes, and we would bring something like that forward, and SROC would just be like, well, we're not advocates. We have a job to do, and we're just going to do it. Meanwhile, these are actual patients. These are patients from dispensaries. And yeah, so that whole thing was kind of frustrating. All of this is frustrating, honestly, from a medical standpoint. I know, like, from adult use, like, they've got their own battles that they're fighting, but like from medical, this has been an uphill battle both ways.
Do you think it's even worth it to get a medical card anymore? I mean, it seems like the product that you're going to see on retail shelves is probably going to be exactly the similar quality as what you find in a dispensary. And do you think it's worth it to get a medical card?
I would say that there are a couple benefits currently to being a patient, but they have nothing to do with like buying product. I don't think you should get a medical card to go to the dispensaries and buy weed there. That's just my personal opinion. I can't tell anybody what to do. I do think that having a caregiver in many, many situations is a really useful thing. And I think that having the sanctity or like the ease of mind of being a caregiver and being, registered and having paperwork to back you up for having X amount of plants, because as a caregiver or as a patient, you do get 2 extra plants. So you're not fucking yourself over for having more plants than you're legally allowed. I think that's probably the biggest benefit. For children, for minors, they can get 2 caregivers if they're registered patients, which is good for things like, one parent can't be responsible 24/7 for administering cannabis if they're working. So it's good for, 2 parents or a parent and a nurse or anything like that. It's still not enough, but it's there. I think that in order for, say, me to return to the medical program, there would need to be a fuck ton of changes.
Name them.
Word. First of all, our caregiver program is not fair to caregivers by any means. It's definitely designed that way. In Maine, for instance, caregivers can grow for between 5 or 6 patients. You can have a 6th revolving patient. You can sell cannabis to your patients, and then you can take the excess and sell it to one of the small.
You could sell directly to your patients.
Yes, you can sell directly to your patient, or you can sell to one of the locally owned small medical dispensaries.
Wow. With no wholesale in between.
Yeah, you can take any excess you have after you've served your patients and you can wholesale it. So it's not just sitting there. And so kind of basing off that model, but tweaking it a bit, I think that there's a 3-tiered option that I foresee for caregivers, being where the first tier is basically what we have now, but patients need to be able to have up to 3 caregivers. If your caregiver has a crop failure, as a patient, you're fucked. But if you have multiple caregivers, if one of them has bugs, if one of them gets mold, anything like that, having that other caregiver on the line means that your caregiver potentially isn't doing some shitty shit, like giving you moldy weed because they're worried you're not going to get anything else.
What if they go on vacation?
Yeah, totally. What if they go on vacation? What if they move? What if they get sick? What if there's an accident?
What if they die?
Yeah, totally. And so patients need up to 3 caregivers. Caregivers need to be able to grow 10 plants per patient, mature plants, with no immature plant cap. An immature plant cap in a market or a program where we've already capped the number of mature plants is stupid. It makes no sense. All it does is make you play roulette with your genetics if you're growing from seed. How do you know you're going to get X amount of female flowering plants if you're only allowed to grow X amount of seeds? There's just no way to be able to tell. So we need to strike the immature plant cap. It's useless. And I think that applies across the board for both markets, medical and adult use. Immature plant caps are so stupid. And then, so that would be the first tier. The next tier up, I see a kind of a supplemental license that can be given to any tier 1 or tier 2 cultivator within the adult use market. And it would give them, I'm skipping, so this would be tier 3. But it would give them up to 10 patients, 10 plants per patient, so an extra 100 plants. And within that agreement, they would agree to provide to the patients, clean, tested medicine because they're already testing everything else. And that patient would receive that medicine at no more than 60% the cost that they would receive it at in the medical dispensaries.
So the medical patients would get a break on the price, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then for what is actually tier 2, I see that as a standalone license that anybody could get where they could grow for up to 5 patients. And same kind of deal, so they could provide medicine to these patients at up to 60% the cost that they would receive it at in the dispensaries. For the first one, kind of what we work off now, and for that second one, for up to 5 patients, I see the testing for both of those being subsidized through the medical cannabis fund. $400,000, that pays for a fuck ton of testing, especially for smaller caregivers. If you're growing for up to 5 patients, that's not a lot of plants, and you're not doing it for a lot of money. So subsidizing the testing for those people. That third tier for people that are registered tier 1, tier 2 adult use cultivators, they're already paying for testing. And I think it's much more worth their while if they're allowed to grow for up to 10 patients.
So let me ask you this. If you're a caretaker and you're growing for, say, if we allow them to grow for a bunch more patients, that's going to certainly be an expensive operation if you can grow up to 100 plants. So they're probably footing the bill for their own grows. how are they going to recoup their costs for those operations?
So in order for all of this to work, I envision some kind of state-run medical co-op, where kind of like in Maine, if you're growing 100 plants, like, let's be honest, like a patient might not necessarily need 10 plants worth of medicine every like 3 months. This is all dependent on the product that the patient needs, the amount that they consume, and the ways in which they consume. So if you have one patient with cancer who needs RSO, they're going to need all 10 plants. But if you have a patient with something like, I don't know, it's something
Arthritis.
Sure. I didn't want to like minimize the amount that you go through, but if you have somebody with a much more, generic and maybe lightweight pain condition,
Sure.
They might not need all 10 plants.
Right.
And so if you have that extra, I foresee a state-run medical co-op where caregivers at this degree in the second and third tier, not the first, could take their wholesale or their extra so that it doesn't go bad and it doesn't just sit there, and they can recoup some of their costs and take it to this co-op where patients, any registered patient, can go and shop and look around and see what other caregivers are growing and try other strains that they can maybe take back to their own caregivers and be like, hey, can you get this cut? Can you grow this for me? I tried this product. I tried this edible and it really worked for me. How can I get more of that?
Yeah.
And I think that cuts out that kind of predatory corporate middleman that the medical dispensaries have currently become.
That's a great quote right there. I might snip that later and quote you on that. Look, we got 2 minutes left, and if you got another half hour, I'd like to chop this and we'll do another one.
Yeah, totally.
And I real quick, just tell me about the Up and Smoke sessions.
Yeah, I've started doing I've only done one so far. I've got another one scheduled for next week. But Up and Smoke sessions, it was just like a little idea I had because there's like so many people, not even just in Vermont, but like so many people that I've met through Instagram and like all over the internet in the last like 5-10 years, just talking about weed. And I've grown like a pretty like cool network of people just like across the world at this point, all just into cannabis. So I'm starting locally with a couple. My first episode was Harmony Adosawan. She's a fantastic chef, content creator, author. She's so cool. Out of Burlington, she runs Harmony's Kitchen. She also runs Hose Defense, which is like a kind of a geared toward women and femmes self-defense tools company.
Oh, cool.
So we hung out and we smoked for like 2 hours and talked about food and movies and books and her business endeavors and cannabis in Vermont. So yeah, that's kind of like a semi-regular series I've started.
Is it like a podcast format? What are we doing?
So it's on my it's currently up on my Instagram. So like under my videos tab.
I'll have to watch it. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
Definitely.
let me chop this up and we'll be right back with more Amelia. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right.